Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be another episode of Who Is Better. The topic for this episode, as you may already know by the thumbnail, Raven versus Tommy Dreamer. To me, this is my favorite feud of all time. These guys are linked with the history of ECW wrestling, which to me is the best promotion of all time. So this one's near and dear to my heart. Now, I've talked about both of these guys ad nauseum, how much I love them. These are two of my favorite wrestlers of all time. For this, if you haven't seen my Who Is Better videos previously, basically we have 8 different categories. Each category we're going to grade on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. At the end, we're going to total up the points that they make from each category. There is an opportunity to make 5 bonus points, which we'll talk about when we get there. And one last thing before I do get into this, I live in Central Florida. As you may or may not have heard, at the time of this recording, we're less than a week after Hurricane Milton. I was personally out of power for a little bit over 3 days. I didn't have much damage here, some roof shingles, tree branches. The power being off was the main thing that was bothersome, and if you live in Florida, you understand how bothersome that could be to not have air conditioning in Florida. There are some people all through the state that are still suffering, that have been double hit by Helene and Milton. So if you fail so in your heart, I know there's a million different places you can look, and there's a million different charities. There's a lot of people hurting in this state. 2 days ago at the time of this recording, I drove about an hour away from me, and I got to see a lot of damage on the way, a lot of stuff. There's a old folks trailer park that is about 10-15 minutes from where I live. They got totally wiped out by a tornado before the hurricane even came, and we're pretty much on the good end of it, so I know there's a lot more than that. So if you have it in your heart, please check into that and donate, because there are people in my state that are still hurt. With that being said, let's get right into this. Starting with our first category, technical wrestling. Now this is your basic chain wrestling, suplexes, submissions, all that fun stuff. For Tommy Dreamer, Tommy's going to get a 3. I think he's good, I think he's serviceable, but this was never his strong point. Maybe early in his career when he was still wearing the suspenders, he was more of a technical guy. But as we'll see, as we'll talk about here in a moment, I feel like this was just average for it. Now for Raven, Raven's also going to get a 3. Where I do think Raven's ring psychology is light years ahead above most other wrestlers, his less is more mentality doesn't allow me to give him much more than this. And this isn't a knock on him. I think Raven, like I said, these are both two of my favorite wrestlers. I would never say that Raven was a work rate guy, and that's kind of what this category is the work rate category. But he was a storyteller, so he excels in other places. Now our next category, striking. That's your punches, your kicks, basically your brawling. I mean, as we know, Tommy Dreamer, Tommy's getting a 5. Not only was he adept at brawling, he was superb at it. And he was innovative. That's why he's the innovator of violence. Even when you add in the hardcore elements, the chairs, the Singapore Canes, the stuff of that nature, it makes him even more dangerous. His stuff all looked good, it all looked believable. That's why he gets such a high mark. For Raven, Raven's also going to get a 5. Whereas his less is more mentality kind of gives him a little bit of a negative on the technical side. On the striking side, it makes so much more sense because everything he does has meaning and it feels impactful. A punch from Raven seems more important than a punch from, let's say, a Will Ospreay, because he's laying it in and he's letting it sit and he's letting you see what that punch did to the other guy. So for that, Raven is getting a 5. Our next category, how they work as a heel. Now Tommy Dreamer's not been a heel, but maybe a little bit of time. I guess you could consider his Invasion era as being heel, maybe, but he never really was a long-term heel, and anytime he's been a heel, he's not been great at it. I'm giving Tommy a 2 here. He is subpar at being a heel because he's the ultimate underdog. He's someone that you want to be a babyface, and again, when he's had the opportunity, he just doesn't do well at it because it's not him. Now for Raven, Raven's getting a 5. No one understands the mentality of being a heel as good as Raven, except for a very select few. Kevin Sullivan, Jake Roberts, Bray Wyatt. People that are that in tune with how to be a heel and how to be the kind of heel that Raven was a manipulative character, a cult leader, basically. He took it to a level that very few have ever been at, and he excelled at it. This is why we're 30 years later and we're still talking about both of these guys, but Raven especially in this category. Just a fantastic heel. Now on the flip side, our next category, how they perform as a babyface. I just mentioned it when I talked about being a heel. Tommy Dreamer is one of the best babyfaces of all time. He gets a 5. He is the ultimate underdog. He is the ultimate everyman. He's the guy that the crowd can look at and say, that's my guy. Kind of like a Dusty Rhodes. You kind of want to cheer for him, almost like a Daniel Bryan in certain ways. No matter how much he got beat up, you always believed he could do the big thing, he could get the big win. Tommy was awesome as a face, and he still is. Now for Raven, Raven's getting a 4. Raven, again, like Tommy, he hasn't had much time as a babyface. The most I could say he was a babyface was in his TNA run, and especially in the run where he was chasing Jeff Jarrett and chasing the NWA World title. He was awesome at it. The fans really got behind him. Now, is he as good of a face as he was a heel? No. But when he was called on to do it, and when he had that behind him, I mean, he made it work, and he was absolutely great in it. So Raven gets a 4 at being a face. He is a better heel, but he's good as a face as well. Now, next up, the promo ability. Tommy's going to get a 3. There's never been a point in Tommy Dreamer's career where his promo has been his strong suit. Has he had great promos? Yes. Was he packaged in a way in ECW that made you believe everything he said? Absolutely. But he's not a guy that I would put up there with like a Mick Foley or a Raven or a Paul Heyman or Dusty Rhodes or superstar Billy Graham. He's not a guy that can get you to fully be behind him just by how he talks. He's serviceable, not great. And on the other side, Raven's getting a 5. I would put Raven on any top list there is of best promos of all time. Everything he said, you believe. And like I mentioned earlier, it was a lot like Jake Roberts or Kevin Sullivan. He had that aura to him. Even though you knew he was an evil asshole cult leader, you still believed in what he was saying. Whether it be in ECW, whether it be in WCW, TNA later on, he was absolutely awesome. And even before the Raven character, when he was Scotty the Body and Scotty Flamingo, him playing the chicken shit jerk heel, it's so perfect. I mean, he's so good. His psychology, which isn't a category here, but it touches a lot of these categories, is so great that it makes him one of the best promo guys of all time. Now moving into our next category, presentation. This is your ring gear, your entrances, your music, all that stuff. How does it make you special? For Tommy Dreamer, Tommy's getting a 4. There are a few things that make Tommy get a 4. Man in the Box, even now to this day, I can't hear Man in the Box without thinking of Tommy Dreamer. And Alice in Chains is one of my favorite bands, and it's a band that I've been listening to since before he used them as music. But he's so entwined with that makes him so high here. Now, while he's not a 5, most of his career he wore basically the same gear that 5 or 6 other guys in ECW would have worn. The black pants, the ECW t-shirt, or House of Hardcore t-shirt, or whatever company he's working at the time's t-shirt. He definitely had a style, but he didn't have one that I would put him into that next level as. Now going to Raven, Raven gets a 5 for presentation. I mean, from his music, his look, his demeanor, he didn't need the pyro to make you think he was something special. From him jumping the guardrail in WCW, coming out of the crowd to wrestle matches, or just kind of the way he would nonchalantly walk to the ring and act like nothing mattered to him. The groupings he'd have around him, the cult he would have. He fit the 90s grunge aesthetic better than any wrestler has for any other time period. And you could say Hulk Hogan in the rock and wrestling era, or maybe a better example for that era would be the Rock and Roll Express, because they look so much like the 80s. But when I think about the 90s and the nihilism and the grunge movement and the counterculture and everything about that, it's just Raven. He's that embodiment. He's absolutely perfect with his presentation. Now our next category, charisma. For charisma, both of these guys are going to get a 5. And the reason they're both getting a 5, they have different charisma. Like I said with Raven, I keep going back to this cult leader. He's like a David Koresh. He's like a Jim Jones. He's someone that draws you in even though you shouldn't be drawn to him. Dreamer, on the other hand, he's got that charisma that you want to root for him. It's kind of like if you have a favorite sports team, whether that's football, American, or European style. He might not be the best player on your team, but he's the player that you cheer for the most. He might not be the guy in baseball that gets 50 home runs, but he gets that one home run that puts him in the playoffs. And he gets a stolen base that wins him the World Series. Or in basketball, he's a guy that hits a jumper, even though he averages 11 points a game, he hits a jumper that puts his team into the championship. So yeah, Dreamer's got that with him. He's an everyman. He's something that you want to believe in. That's where he gets his charisma. Raven has a different kind of charisma, like I said, like a cult leader, almost kind of like a Jim Morrison. He has a lot of aspects of all that, and it's just great. Now, our last category, big game performance. This is how they perform when they're asked to be in the main event, when they're asked to highlight a pay-per-view, be the person that they sell tickets for. Just the fact that over 2 years, both of these guys were the focal point and biggest feud of ECW puts them, for me, both out of 5. They delivered every single time, whether it be memorable moments like the chair shot heard around the world where Dreamer hit Raven with the chair where he's handcuffed to the cage, or bringing in Beulah McGillicuddy, or Tommy finally beating Raven, even though they both say they didn't want that to happen. For us fans, I think we needed it. I go back and forth on it. I could see the argument, but for fans, it was very cathartic. Whether it be them in other positions, like Tommy Dreamer being the guy that always is a representation of ECW when it comes to shows like One Night Stand, or Raven being a main guy in TNA. He didn't quite get that opportunity in WCW or WWE, and Dreamer didn't get the opportunity in WWE either. But when they had the opportunities, they made the most of it. They're both 5s as far as big game performers, in my opinion. Now let's go to the totals. For Tommy Dreamer has 32 total points. For Raven has 37. Now there is an opportunity for them to get 5 bonus points, and how they do that, every week we put out a poll on the community page of this YouTube channel, and basically we ask you guys, who do you think is better? You can pick either Raven or Tommy Dreamer in this case. The winner gets a bonus 5 points. For this, with almost 600 votes, Raven won, so he gets the 5 bonus points. It didn't change it here, but as you can see, if Tommy would have won, it would have been a tie. And then I would have had to think of another tiebreaker, which is why they had the bonus points in the first place. That's the tiebreaker. Raven's your winner. Much like most of the feud, he beat Tommy Dreamer, and I think both of them would be okay with that. My absolute favorite feud of all time. I highly recommend any wrestling fan anywhere in the world reaching out and watching this any way you can. I know RF Video used to make a compilation. I don't know if that's still available. You may have to go to eBay to see and find that, where it had the entire feud. But it's something I would recommend to any hardcore wrestling fan. And by hardcore, I don't mean just hardcore like chairs and thumbtacks and all that. By hardcore, I mean you watch AEW, you watch Ring of Honor, you watch TNA, you watch WWE, you've watched all kinds of promotions, and you watch as much wrestling as possible. You're probably a hardcore wrestling fan if you're watching this video. That's what I mean by hardcore. It is artwork. To me, it's one of the greatest stories ever told, wrestling or otherwise. Like I said, Raven picks up the win here. Just an awesome wrestler. And to give you guys a little bit of a spoiler, for our next subject, we're going to go with 3 men. And the 3 men we're going to compare have been a group for over a decade, or almost a decade now. I'll leave it at that. Stay tuned if you want to know before the video comes out. You can vote starting this Wednesday coming up on our community page between the 3 men to see who is the best of the 3. But with all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Who Is Better.